They reject you before they choose you, and the rejection is the test, not conscious test, not planned strategy, not deliberate manipulation, but test nonetheless. Test of whether you'll stay. Test of whether you'll pursue. Test of whether you'll prove through your response to rejection that you're safe enough, committed enough, patient enough to be chosen. The rejecting before choosing is pattern, is how they operate, is what they do with everyone they might actually want. The people who don't matter get kept at comfortable distance without rejection, because comfortable distance doesn't require test. But people who matter, people who've gotten close, people who've activated their attachment system, those people get rejected, get pushed away, get told directly or indirectly that it's over, that it won't work, that they need space, that they're not ready. The rejection is their nervous system protecting itself through creating distance. But underneath protection is hope. Hope that you'll stay anyway. Hope that rejection won't work. Hope that you'll prove you're different from everyone who hurt them by staying despite the push. The pattern is devastatingly common, is almost universal among avoidants who feel something real. They meet someone, feel connection, feel attraction, feel possibility. The feeling triggers fear. Fear triggers defense. Defense manifests as rejection. They end it. They create distance. They push you away right when things are getting real, right when intimacy is developing, right when relationship is moving from casual to significant. The timing isn't coincidence, it's precisely when their nervous system activates most strongly. When attachment anxiety peaks, when closeness triggers their deepest wounds about people leaving, about being too much, about not being enough, about intimacy being dangerous, so they reject. They reject you before you can reject them. They reject you before they're in so deep that your potential rejection would destroy them. They reject you while they still have some control, while they can still tell themselves it was their choice, while they can still protect themselves through being the one who ends it. But rejection isn't ending, is test, is them seeing what you do with the rejection. Do you leave? Do you accept it? Do you move on? Or do you stay? Do you pursue? Do you prove through your staying that rejection doesn't change your commitment? That their push doesn't eliminate your pull, that their fear doesn't eliminate your consistency. The staying is what they're testing for, is what their wounded attachment system needs to see, needs evidence that you won't abandon them when they're difficult, won't leave when they push, won't give up when they reject. The evidence through staying is what makes them feel safe enough to choose you, safe enough to pull you back, safe enough to be vulnerable. But evidence only comes if you pass test, pass by staying when they reject. And staying when rejected is an incredibly difficult thing to ask of someone. Is essentially asking you to prove your love by tolerating their wounding behavior, by accepting their pattern, by staying through their push. And staying through push is sometimes healthy persistence. And sometimes is unhealthy tolerance of poor treatment, and knowing which is nearly impossible in the moment. The psychological mechanism behind reject before choosing pattern. Their nervous system experiences intimacy as threat, not intellectual threat. Biological threat. Their attachment system was wired in childhood to associate closeness with danger, with being hurt, with being abandoned, with being overwhelmed. The wiring is deep, is pre-verbal, is stored in parts of brain that don't respond to logic. So when intimacy develops, when connection deepens, when relationship becomes significant, their nervous system activates, sends danger signals, creates physical sensation of threat, makes closeness feel unsafe even when person is safe. Even when nothing threatening is happening, the felt threat is real to them, is happening in their body, is creating genuine fear response. And fear response is fight or flight. And for avoidant, flight looks like rejection, looks like creating distance, looks like ending things before things get deeper. The rejection is also protection against vulnerability. Vulnerability is what intimacy requires, is necessary for relationship to deepen. But vulnerability is exactly what they can't do. Can't risk, can't tolerate. Because vulnerability in their history led to being hurt, led to needs not being met, led to people leaving, led to pain they never processed. So vulnerability equals danger in their system. And danger must be avoided, must be protected against, must be prevented. And preventing vulnerability requires preventing intimacy. And preventing intimacy requires rejection, requires pushing away a person who's making them feel things that would require vulnerability to sustain. So they reject. They reject you to protect themselves from having to be vulnerable with you, to protect themselves from having to trust you, to protect themselves from having to need you in ways they can't control. Rejection is also an attempt to restore control. Relationship developing means losing control, means becoming interdependent, means needing someone, means being affected by someone, means someone having power to hurt you. The loss of control is intolerable to defended system. System that was built on never needing anyone, never depending on anyone, never being vulnerable to anyone. So when control is slipping, when they're starting to need you, when they're starting to care in ways that make them vulnerable, they grab control back. And grabbing control back looks like rejection. Looks like them deciding to end it. Looks like them being the one who chooses distance. The choosing distance restores sense of control, restores sense of power, restores sense that they're not at mercy of relationship, not dependent on you, not vulnerable to losing you. Because they already lost you through choosing to lose you. And chosen loss feels safer than unchosen loss, feels controllable, feels like protection even though it's actually self-sabotage. Why they need you to fail the test by staying when you should leave. They're testing for unconditional acceptance, testing whether you'll love them despite their patterns, testing whether you'll stay despite their push, testing whether you're a safe person who won't abandon them when they're difficult. The testing is understandable. Is their wounded system trying to find safety, trying to find a person who'll stay, trying to find evidence that someone won't leave when they're struggling? But test is unfair. Is asking you to prove love by tolerating behavior that's harmful, by staying when healthy response would be leaving, by accepting rejection when self-respect requires honoring rejection. The unfair test is them needing you to fail what would be healthy test, needing you to succeed at unhealthy test, needing you to stay when you should go, because staying when you should go is the only thing that makes them feel safe enough to let you stay. The paradox is cruel. If you leave when they reject you, you're proving you're like everyone else, proving you'll abandon them, proving their fear about people leaving is justified. But leaving when rejected is healthy boundary, is self-respect, is appropriate response to rejection, so healthy response to their rejection confirms their wound, confirms people leave, confirms they're not worth staying for, confirms intimacy leads to abandonment. But if you stay when they reject you, if you pursue despite push, if you prove through staying that rejection doesn't change your commitment, you're proving you're different, proving you're safe. But staying when rejected is unhealthy boundary, is accepting poor treatment, is tolerating pattern that will repeat. So unhealthy response to their rejection is what makes them feel safe. And safe through unhealthy response is set up for dysfunction, is foundation of relationship built on you tolerating their patterns, on you sacrificing your boundaries to accommodate their wounds, on you failing healthy tests to pass their wounded tests. They need you to stay because staying is evidence. Evidence that their push doesn't destroy connection. Evidence that their difficulty doesn't make them unlovable. Evidence that someone will be there even when they're struggling. The evidence is what they never got, what their childhood didn't provide, what their attachment wounds are based on absence of. They needed consistent caregiver who stayed through difficulty, who didn't abandon when they were too much, who remained present when they were struggling. But they didn't get that, got abandonment, got inconsistency, got people who left when they most needed them to stay, so now they're recreating. Recreating the test, testing whether you'll stay when caregiver didn't stay, testing whether you're different from people who hurt them, testing whether this time someone will finally pass the test their attachment system needs passed to feel safe. But passing requires you failing yourself, requires you choosing them over yourself, requires you tolerating rejection to prove you won't abandon them when they reject you. And tolerating rejection to prove non-abandonment is impossible standard, is asking you to be bottomless well of patience and tolerance, is asking you to have no boundaries, is asking you to sacrifice yourself to their wound. And sacrifice is what some people do. What people pleasers do, what codependents do, what anxiously attached do, and those people pass the test. And passing the test means being chosen, but being chosen after passing wounded test is being chosen for your willingness to tolerate dysfunction. And tolerating dysfunction becomes your role, becomes what relationship is built on, becomes pattern that continues forever unless something changes. The specific ways they reject you before potentially choosing you. Some reject through ending the relationship explicitly, through having the conversation, through saying they can't do this anymore, through articulating they need space, through directly stating it's over. The explicit rejection is clear, is undeniable, is them putting words to what they're doing. But explicit rejection is also test. is them seeing if you'll accept the rejection or fight for relationship, if you'll walk away or stay pursuing, if you'll give them space they asked for, or prove space isn't what they actually want by refusing to give it. The explicit as test is them saying one thing while hoping for opposite response, saying it's over while hoping you'll prove it's not over by staying, saying they need space while hoping you'll prove they don't need space by being consistently available. The contradiction is them being split. Defended part says end it. Attached part hopes you won't let it end. And split self-communicating contradictory desires is you receiving rejection while being expected to know rejection isn't what they actually want. Others reject through creating distance without explanation, through pulling back, through becoming unavailable, through going cold, through withdrawing without stating they're withdrawing. The implicit rejection is ambiguous, is confusing, is them rejecting you through behavior without words, through absence without acknowledgement of absence, through distance without declaration of distance. The ambiguous rejection is still test, is them seeing how you respond to withdrawal. Do you pursue? Do you ask what's wrong? Do you try to close distance? Or do you mirror their distance? Do you pull back too? Do you accept the withdrawal as message? The pursuing or mirroring is your choice, is your response to their test, and response determines whether you pass. Pursuing passes, shows them you notice withdrawal and you're trying to reconnect. Shows them distance doesn't make you give up. Shows them cold doesn't make you leave. Mirroring fails, shows them you'll pull back when they pull back. Shows them you won't fight for connection. Shows them they were right to believe people abandon them when things get difficult. Some reject through manufactured conflict, through picking fights, through creating problems, through being critical, through finding flaws, through making relationship difficult. The conflict rejection is them testing through chaos, testing whether you'll stay through difficulty, testing whether you'll tolerate their worst, testing whether you'll leave when they're being difficult or prove you're different by staying anyway. The manufactured difficulty is defense, is them creating problems that justify the rejection they want to do anyway. Is them making you want to leave, so when you leave they can tell themselves you left because of problems, not because they pushed you away. But also hoping you won't leave, hoping you'll stay through manufactured problems, hoping you'll see through the defense to the wound underneath, hoping you'll fight for relationship despite them making relationship unfightable. The hoping while creating reasons not to hope is contradiction, is them wanting you to stay while making staying nearly impossible. And staying through impossible is what proves you're safe, proves you're different, proves you won't abandon them. But proving through tolerating abuse is proving through being damaged, through accepting treatment that wounds you, through staying when staying is harming you. Why their rejection feels so devastating and confusing. The rejection feels devastating because it comes when things were good, when connection was building, when intimacy was developing, when relationship had momentum. The timing makes it feel like betrayal, like they changed suddenly, like something shifted without warning. But shift wasn't sudden. Shift was building inside them as intimacy built, as closeness increased, as attachment activated. The activation was invisible to you, was happening in their nervous system, was creating fear you couldn't see. So rejection feels sudden when actually it was building gradually in response to closeness you are experiencing as positive. The mismatch between your experience and their experience is disorienting. Is you feeling safe while they're feeling threatened? You feeling happy while they're feeling scared? You feeling hopeful while they're feeling need to escape? And opposite experiences of same relationship is confusion. Is you not understanding what happened, not understanding what changed, not understanding why good thing suddenly became rejected thing. The rejection is also devastating because it often includes them telling you you're too much, too intense, too needy, too demanding, too emotional. The too much message is wounding, is hitting directly at wound most people carry. Wound about being acceptable, about being lovable as they are, about not needing to be different to be wanted. They're telling you you're too much is activating your wound while protecting theirs. Is them making you the problem, making your needs the issue, making your intensity the reason for rejection. When actually their incapacity is reason. Their inability to meet normal needs is actual issue. Their defended state interpreting healthy attachment as too much is real problem. But they frame it as you being too much. And framing as you being problem protects them, lets them reject without taking responsibility, lets them create distance without facing that distance is their pattern, lets them make you doubt yourself instead of them doubting themselves. And making you doubt yourself is projection, is them giving you their doubt, giving you their sense of being too much, giving you their shame about their needs. And giving you their shame is wounding you, is damaging your sense of self. Is making you question whether you're acceptable when you are being completely acceptable and they're the one who can't accept normal relationship needs. The rejection is confusing because it contradicts their previous behavior. They were pursuing, they were interested, they were showing signs of caring, they were building connection. The previous behavior made you believe relationship was progressing, made you trust that they wanted this, made you feel safe investing. But rejection contradicts all of that, makes previous behavior seem false, seem like performance, seem like manipulation. But previous behavior was real, was genuine, was actually them trying, was them in their attached state before defended state activated. The shift from attached to defended is real shift, is them actually changing states, actually going from wanting connection to fearing connection. But shift happens internally, happens invisibly. So from outside it looks like they changed their mind, looks like they were lying, looks like you were fooled, when actually they weren't lying and you weren't fooled. They were genuinely interested, then genuinely scared, were genuinely wanting connection, then genuinely needing distance. The genuine shift between states is real, but experiencing it from outside is experiencing whiplash, is confusion, is not knowing which version is real when both versions are real but activate at different times based on how threatened their nervous system feels. What they're hoping will happen when they reject you, they're hoping you'll pursue, will fight for the relationship, will prove through your pursuit that you really want them, that rejection doesn't change your wanting, that their push doesn't eliminate your pull. The hoping for pursuit is them needing evidence, needing proof, needing you to show them through action that you're committed, that you're not going anywhere, that they're worth fighting for. The need is understandable, is wounded person needing reassurance. But reassurance through pursuing despite rejection is asking you to prove love through ignoring their stated boundary, through violating their expressed wish for distance, through continuing to pursue when they said they don't want to be pursued. And violating stated boundary to prove love is impossible position, is you having to choose between respecting them and proving you love them, between honoring their words and passing their test, between being respectful and being chosen. The impossible choice is unfair, is them creating situation where healthy response fails and unhealthy response succeeds. They're also hoping you'll see through the rejection to the fear underneath, will understand they're scared, not uninterested, will recognize the pattern as defense, not truth, will know that rejection is protection, not lack of caring. The hoping you'll understand is them wanting you to be mind reader, wanting you to know what they can't say, wanting you to see what they can't show, wanting you to understand they're wounded so you'll have patience with the wounding behavior. The wanting understanding, without explaining, is asking you to do emotional labor they should be doing, asking you to figure out their internal experience, asking you to make sense of behavior that doesn't make sense from outside, asking you to know their fear when all you can see is their rejection. And knowing fear through rejection is nearly impossible, is expecting you to have insight into them they don't have into themselves, expecting you to understand patterns they haven't named, expecting you to be therapist, not partner, and being therapist to partner is role reversal, is you doing work that's theirs, is you carrying responsibility for understanding and managing their emotional state while they remain defended and unknowing. They're hoping you'll prove you're different from people who hurt them, that you won't abandon them when they're difficult, won't leave when they push, won't give up when they test. The hoping you're different is them looking for corrective experience, looking for person who'll stay when others left, looking for evidence that this time will be different, that this person won't hurt them like they were hurt before. The looking for different is valid need, is wanting to heal, wanting to have experience that rewrites the wound. But healing through you tolerating their pattern is putting their healing on you, is making you responsible for fixing wound you didn't create, is expecting you to heal them through accepting their dysfunction. And healing through accepting dysfunction doesn't heal, creates codependence, creates dynamic where they stay wounded and you stay accommodating, where they keep testing and you keep proving, where they keep rejecting and you keep pursuing. The cycle doesn't heal wound, reinforces wound, reinforces their belief that they need to test people, that relationships require pushing and pursuing, that love is proven through tolerance of poor treatment, and reinforced wound is wound that doesn't heal, is wound that becomes permanent feature of relationship. Is wound that you both carry and maintain through the pattern of reject, pursue, prove, choose that becomes endless cycle unless something breaks it. Why some avoidants never make the final choice even when you pass the test. Some are testing perpetually needing proof, perpetually needing reassurance, perpetually needing evidence that you'll stay. You pass one test and there's another test. You prove yourself through one rejection and there's another rejection. The perpetual testing is them never feeling safe enough, never accumulating enough evidence, never being convinced by your staying that you won't leave eventually. The never convinced is wound that's too deep, is attachment trauma that's too severe, is nervous system that can't be soothed through your consistency because inconsistency they experienced was too early, too prolonged, too damaging. The too damaged to soothe is them needing therapy, not relationship, needing professional help to address wound, needing to do internal work that your external staying can't accomplish. But they don't do the work. Just keep testing, keep rejecting, keep hoping next proof will be enough when no proof is enough, because proof isn't the problem. Their wound is the problem. And wound doesn't heal through testing, heals through processing, through grieving, through developing security internally rather than seeking security through your ability to tolerate their perpetual rejection. Others discover that choosing you requires vulnerability they're incapable of. They wanted you to stay through rejection. You did. You proved you're committed. You proved you won't abandon them. But proving you're safe didn't make them capable, didn't develop their capacity for intimacy, didn't give them skills for vulnerability. Just proved you're patient enough to tolerate their incapacity. And tolerating incapacity isn't same as them developing capacity. So they're stuck. Stuck knowing you're safe while being unable to be vulnerable with safe person. Stuck wanting to choose you while being terrified of what choosing requires. Stuck between knowing you passed test and knowing they still can't do relationship because relationship requires capacity they lack. The stuck despite past test is them facing that problem isn't whether you're safe. Problem is whether they're capable. And they're not capable of sustaining intimacy. Not capable of maintaining vulnerability, not capable of being in relationship even with person who proved they're trustworthy. The incapacity is tragedy. Is them losing person who loved them enough to stay through rejection because staying through rejection isn't enough. Capacity is required, and capacity doesn't exist. And without capacity, even safest person can't be chosen because choosing requires ability they don't have. Some realize that relationship built on you tolerating rejection isn't relationship they want. They tested you. You stayed. You proved yourself. But relationship that started with test is relationship built on unhealthy foundation. Is relationship where dynamic is established as them pushing and you accommodating, them being difficult and you being patient, them rejecting and you pursuing. The dynamic is unsustainable, is unfair, is them having all the power and you having all the responsibility. And even avoidance can sometimes see this, can see that relationship built on wounded test isn't healthy relationship. Can see that choosing you after making you prove yourself through tolerating rejection is choosing you for wrong reasons, for your willingness to tolerate poor treatment rather than for genuine compatibility, for your codependence rather than for mutual respect. The seeing unhealthy foundation is rare self-awareness, is them recognizing that just because you passed test doesn't mean relationship should continue, that relationship starting with rejection test is relationship starting with dysfunction. And dysfunction isn't foundation for health, even when both people are committed, even when you stayed, even when you proved yourself. The commitment and proving don't undo the unhealthy beginning. Don't transform wounded test into healthy start. Don't make relationship based on you tolerating their pattern into relationship based on mutual capacity. So they don't choose, not because you failed, but because they recognize choosing you after that test is choosing dysfunction. And some avoidants, the rare ones with insight, choose not to choose to let you go despite you staying, choose to not build relationship on foundation of your tolerance of their rejection. The choosing not to choose is gift. Is them seeing clearly enough to not trap you in relationship that started with you sacrificing your boundaries to pass their test? What happens to you when you stay through their rejection? Staying through their rejection changes you, changes how you see yourself, changes what you believe you deserve, changes your relationship to boundaries. The changing is gradual, is happening while you're focused on proving yourself, while you're focused on passing their test, while you're focused on being patient enough, understanding enough, committed enough to make them feel safe. But while you're focused on them, you're losing yourself. Losing sense of what's acceptable. Losing clarity about what you need. Losing connection to your own worth that would tell you that tolerating rejection isn't proof of love, is violation of self. You start believing love requires sacrifice, requires you accepting less than you need, requires you tolerating behavior that hurts you, requires you proving yourself repeatedly. The belief is poisonous. Is transforming your understanding of love from mutual respect to one-sided accommodation, from partnership to caretaking, from reciprocity to you giving endlessly while they take conditionally. The transformed understanding of love is wound. Is you developing your own attachment trauma through relationship with their attachment trauma? Is you learning that love means tolerating rejection? That commitment means staying when healthy response is leaving? That being good partner means sacrificing your needs to accommodate their patterns? And learning love as sacrifice is learning wrong thing? Is developing beliefs about relationship that will damage you, that will make you vulnerable to people who take advantage, that will make you accept poor treatment as normal, as expected, as what love requires. You also start doubting yourself. Start wondering if you are too much, if your needs are unreasonable, if your expectations are too high, if you're the problem they say you are. The self-doubt is insidious. Is their projection becoming your internalized belief? Is their defended interpretation of your normal needs becoming your interpretation? Is you seeing yourself through their defended lens and finding yourself lacking? The distorted self-perception is damage. Is you losing clarity about who you are, losing trust in your own needs as legitimate, losing confidence in your own perceptions as accurate? The losing is making you smaller, making you doubt what you know, making you question yourself in ways that serve their defense while harming your sense of self. And harmed self-perception is wound, that persists. That affects future relationships. That makes you vulnerable to more rejection testing because you've learned to see yourself as too much rather than seeing their incapacity as too little. Staying through rejection also teaches you to ignore your own pain, to minimize your hurt, to focus on understanding their fear while dismissing your own fear, to have empathy for their wound while having no compassion for your own wound. This selective empathy is destroying your self-relationship, is making their feelings more important than your feelings, their needs more legitimate than your needs, their wound more worthy of care than your wound. The hierarchy of importance is you learning you don't matter as much, learning your pain is less valid, learning your needs are less worthy of being met, and learning you matter less is core wound. Is you developing belief about your own worthlessness, about your needs being burden, about your pain being inconvenient. The belief is exactly what their avoidance system wants you to believe, wants you to minimize yourself so they can stay defended, wants you to not need so they can stay distant, wants you to tolerate rejection so they can keep testing. Your minimized self serves their defended self. But minimized self is damaged self, is you being harmed by relationship that requires you to be less than you are so they can stay defended against being more than they're capable of being. The rare times when reject then choose pattern actually works. Pattern works when avoidant recognizes the pattern and takes responsibility for it. When they reject you, but then immediately recognize they're doing their pattern. Recognize they're scared, not uninterested. Recognize they're defending, not rejecting truthfully. The immediate recognition is self-awareness, is them knowing themselves well enough to catch pattern in action, to name it, to take responsibility for it. The responsible avoidant is rare. Is avoidant who's done enough therapy to recognize patterns, enough work to know their triggers, enough growth to catch themselves rejecting when rejection is defense, not truth, and catching themselves allows them to correct, to reach back out, to explain what happened, to name their fear, to ask if you'll give them another chance, to commit to working on pattern rather than expecting you to just tolerate pattern. The commitment to work is what makes this version okay. Is them not expecting you to prove yourself through staying? Is them taking responsibility for their pattern? Is them doing work to change rather than expecting you to accommodate? Pattern also works when you have such strong boundaries that their test fails immediately, when you respond to rejection with immediate acceptance and distance, when you don't pursue, when you don't try to convince them, when you simply say okay and walk away. The strong boundary response sometimes shocks their system, sometimes makes them realize immediately that you're not going to play the game, not going to chase, not going to prove yourself, The realization can create panic, can activate their attachment system in different way, can make them pursue you instead of testing whether you'll pursue them. The role reversal is healthier, is them doing the work of pursuit. Them proving they want you. Them being vulnerable enough to reach back out after you honored their rejection. The them pursuing you is them showing capacity, showing they can be vulnerable, showing they can choose you actively rather than choosing you conditionally based on whether you pass their test. This version is healthier because power is balanced, because vulnerability is theirs, not yours, because proving is their responsibility, not yours. Pattern works when avoidant is actively in therapy and using relationship as practice ground for new skills. When they reject you, but then bring it to therapy. Process it with therapist, understand what happened. Develop language for their fear. Develop capacity to be vulnerable about their fear. Then reach back out with new understanding and new tools. The therapy-supported avoidant is doing the work, is not expecting you to heal them, is taking responsibility for their pattern while working to change pattern. Is giving you transparency about their process, is asking for patience while also doing concrete work that earns patience. The concrete work is what makes this acceptable, is them not asking you to wait indefinitely, is them showing progress, showing effort, showing that your patience is being met with their growth, that your understanding is being met with their work, that your staying is being met with their changing. The mutuality makes it bearable, makes it relationship rather than caretaking, makes it partnership rather than you sacrificing to their pattern. Why most people should honor the rejection instead of trying to pass the test. Honoring rejection is respecting yourself, is believing that when someone says they don't want relationship, you take them at their word, is trusting that rejection is information about their capacity, their readiness, their ability to meet you. The information is valuable, is telling you clearly that they can't do this, can't be in relationship, can't give you what you need. Honoring that information is self-protection. Is you accepting what they're telling you about themselves and making decision based on that truth rather than based on hope they're lying or testing or will change their mind. The self-protection is healthy, is appropriate, is you valuing yourself enough to not stay where you're not wanted. Honoring rejection is also refusing to participate in unhealthy dynamic, is recognizing that relationship starting with test is relationship starting with dysfunction. That being asked to prove yourself through tolerating rejection is being asked to establish pattern of you accommodating while they control. The recognizing dysfunction is wisdom, is seeing clearly that healthy relationships don't start with rejection tests. Start with mutual interest, mutual respect, mutual vulnerability, not with one person testing, another person proving. The seeing clearly allows you to opt out, to refuse the test, to say this isn't how I do relationships, this isn't what I'll accept. This isn't dynamic I'll participate in. The refusing is boundary, is standard, is you knowing what you deserve and not settling for less even when person rejecting you is person you care about. Honoring rejection protects you from the damage of staying, protects you from learning that love requires sacrifice, from developing belief you're too much, from losing yourself in effort to prove yourself, from becoming smaller to accommodate their defended state. The protection is gift to yourself, is you choosing your well-being over their wound, choosing your growth over their pattern, choosing your future self who won't carry damage from having stayed through rejection test. The choosing yourself is loving yourself, is being your own advocate, is doing for yourself what you'd want someone you love to do for themselves if they were being rejected as test. You'd want them to leave, want them to honor the rejection, want them to protect themselves. So honoring rejection is doing for yourself what you'd want for someone you love, is treating yourself with the care you'd give others. Honoring rejection also forces them to face consequence. If you stay, consequence is avoided, pattern is reinforced, test is validated. They learn rejection followed by your pursuit works, that they can keep doing this, that their pattern is sustainable because people will tolerate it. But if you leave, consequence is real, pattern doesn't work, test fails. They learn that rejection creates actual loss, that pushing away creates actual distance, that testing costs them people. The learning is what they need, is consequence that might drive change, might drive therapy, might drive them to face patterns, might drive growth, or might not, might just be consequence they carry as loss. But either way, consequence is appropriate, is natural result of rejection. Is them experiencing what rejection creates, And experiencing consequence is only thing that teaches some people, only thing that creates motivation to change, only thing that makes patterns visible as problems rather than sustainable strategies. The moment they realize they've lost you through the reject test pattern, realization often comes when you don't pursue, when you honor their rejection, when you accept the ending and move on. The moving on is unexpected, is not what their pattern predicted, not what usually happens. Usually people pursue, usually people stay, usually people prove themselves, but you didn't. You left. You accepted the rejection as real. You moved forward without them. The moved forward is shock to their system, is them realizing the test failed, that you didn't stay, that rejection created real ending instead of temporary distance they could close when ready. The real ending is them facing consequence, facing loss, facing that their pattern cost them you. The realization also comes when they see you thriving, see you happy without them, see you with someone else, see you building life that doesn't include them. The thriving is evidence, evidence you didn't need them. Evidence you're better without them. Evidence their rejection freed you rather than bound you to proving yourself. The evidence destroys their secret hope, hope that you were waiting, that you'd be available when they were ready. That door was still open, but door is closed, you moved on. You're thriving, you're unavailable. And unavailable is them realizing too late that you were available and they destroyed availability through their pattern, through their test, through their rejection that you honored instead of chased. Realization sometimes comes when they're ready, when they've done therapy, when they've processed their wound, when they've developed capacity, when they're finally able to be in relationship, they reach out. Ready now, capable now, want to try again now, but you're gone. You're moved on, you're with someone else or happy alone. You're not available to their readiness, because readiness came too late, came after you left, came after you built life without them. The too late readiness is specific devastation. Is them being ready for person who's no longer available? Being capable for relationship that no longer exists? Being vulnerable with person who no longer needs their vulnerability because person has moved on to relationship where vulnerability is mutual from start, where readiness was simultaneous, where capacity was present rather than developed years too late. The too late is permanent regret. Is them carrying forever the knowing that they were capable but not in time, that they could have had you but not when it mattered, that readiness came but came after you stopped waiting for readiness. What this pattern teaches about avoidant attachment and relationship capacity, pattern reveals that avoidants experience closeness and fear simultaneously, that intimacy activates attachment and defense at same time, that wanting and pushing away are simultaneous internal experiences. The simultaneity is their struggle, is them being split, is them wanting connection while fearing connection, wanting you while needing to push you away. The split is why they seem contradictory, why their behavior doesn't match their feelings, why they reject what they want. They're not lying about wanting you, not pretending about caring. They're actually split, actually experiencing both at once, actually wanting while fearing. And both at once is torture for them, is confusion for you. Is source of reject then choose pattern that emerges from internal contradiction they're struggling with. Pattern also reveals that avoidants can't differentiate between past danger and present safety, that their nervous system responds to current intimacy with alarm based on past hurt, that you being safe person doesn't change their system's interpretation of closeness as threat. The can't differentiate is why your safety doesn't make them feel safe, why your consistency doesn't soothe their fear, why your love doesn't convince them loving is safe. They're not responding to you, they're responding to their history, to their wound, to their nervous system's learned association between intimacy and danger. And responding to history not present is them being unable to see you clearly, unable to see relationship clearly, unable to assess danger accurately. Their wound is creating false alarm, is telling them you're dangerous when you're safe, is telling them closeness will hurt when closeness could heal. And false alarm driving rejection is them being controlled by past, by wound, by nervous system that won't update based on new evidence, because wound is too deep to be soothed by evidence. Pattern teaches that testing is desperate attempt at safety, is wounded system trying to find evidence of security, trying to prove person is trustworthy, trying to establish that staying is safe. The testing is also doomed strategy, because tests don't create safety. Tests create more insecurity, create dynamic where they're always wondering if you'll stay, always needing more proof. Always testing again because last proof wasn't enough. The testing as safety strategy fails because safety comes from internal security, not external proof. Comes from them healing wound, not from you proving you won't activate wound. Comes from therapy and processing and developing earned security, rather than from your tolerance of their rejection proving you're different from people who hurt them. You being different doesn't heal their wound, just proves you're willing to be hurt by their wound, and willing to be hurt isn't foundation for their healing, it's foundation for your damage. For relationship built on dysfunction, for pattern that continues until something breaks it. The truth about reject before choosing as relationship foundation, relationship starting with rejection test is relationship with unhealthy foundation, is relationship built on you proving yourself, on you sacrificing boundaries, on you accommodating their wound. The foundation is unstable, is creating power imbalance, is establishing dynamic where they test and you prove, where they push and you stay, where they reject and you accommodate. The dynamic is parent-child, not partner-partner. Is you being endlessly patient caregiver to their wounded child state. Is you doing emotional labor while they stay defended? Is you being responsible for their security while they're not responsible for your security? The imbalance is baked into foundation, is built into how relationships started. And imbalance built into foundation is imbalance that persists. That becomes how relationship functions. That becomes pattern you can't escape, because escaping would require rebuilding foundation, and foundation can't be rebuilt while living in house built on broken foundation. Foundation of rejection test also means relationship is conditional in specific way, is conditional on you continuing to prove yourself, continuing to tolerate rejection. Continuing to pass tests, the continuing requirement is exhausting, is unsustainable. Is you being perpetually on trial, perpetually needing to demonstrate worthiness, perpetually earning right to be chosen rather than being chosen unconditionally. The conditional choosing is fragile, is threatened constantly by possibility you'll stop proving, stop tolerating, stop passing tests, and threatened relationship is anxious relationship. It's relationship where you can't relax, can't trust, can't feel secure because security depends on your continued performance of passing tests, not on mutual commitment. The performance-based relationship is transaction. Is you trading your boundary violations for their conditional choosing? Is you buying their presence with your tolerance? And bought presence is not freely given presence. Is presence that disappears when you stop paying price of tolerating their pattern. Relationship starting with rejection also means trust is broken before it's built. Is them showing you from start that they'll reject you when they're scared, that they'll push you away when vulnerable, that they'll create distance when things get real. The showing you their pattern is information, is preview of what relationship will be, is warning about what to expect, and warning through rejection test is them telling you clearly who they are, how they operate, what they'll do when intimacy triggers them. And who they're telling you they are is person who rejects when scared, who tests when vulnerable, who pushes when getting close. Believing they'll be different after you prove yourself is hoping they'll change. But people don't change fundamental patterns just because you pass test. Patterns persist, especially when patterns work. When rejection followed by your staying teaches them that pattern is sustainable, that rejection doesn't cost them people who matter. That testing is effective strategy. Your staying through rejection reinforces pattern rather than changing pattern, makes pattern more likely to repeat. Makes them more confident that rejection test works as way to manage their fear while keeping you available. And working pattern is pattern that continues. That becomes relationship's defining feature. That becomes what you both do, them rejecting when scared, you staying despite rejection, cycle repeating until you're exhausted or they're ready. And exhausted or ready is future that's uncertain. That might never come. That's asking you to sacrifice present for possibility of future that may not exist. They reject before choosing because wound requires testing, because nervous system can't trust without proof, because defended state needs evidence before vulnerability. The needing is real, is coming from genuine wound, from real pain, from attachment trauma that's not their fault. But not their fault doesn't mean your responsibility, doesn't mean you should stay through rejection, doesn't mean you should prove yourself to their wound. Their wound is theirs to heal, through therapy, through work, through developing internal security that your external staying can't create. You can have compassion for wound while honoring rejection, can understand their pattern while refusing to participate in pattern, can see their pain while protecting yourself from pattern pain creates. The both at once is maturity. Is you being compassionate without being codependent, being understanding without being self-sacrificing, being kind while maintaining boundaries. And boundaries with compassion is healthy response, is loving response, is response that honors both them and you, honors their wound while refusing to be wounded by their wound, honors their process while refusing to sacrifice yourself to their process, honors them while honoring yourself more.